a rare fabric, a torn hem, a question only Poirot could ask. Welcome to Agent Ash. I am your host, Hallow. Comment below. Where are you tuning in from tonight? Your support makes each case come alive. Let's begin the tale. The morning that the Countess de Vries was found dead, the breakfast room at Charnwood Grange was unusually still. The toast was untouched. The butter dish remained cold. The silver tea service, engraved with the family crest, had not been disturbed since being laid by Mrs. Hargrave at precisely 7:28 a.m. In fact, everything in the stately room, its wood panels, its ancestral portraits, its stiff damask curtains, was as it should have been, save for one jarring thing. The body slumped near the French windows, dressed in midnight blue silk, one arm outstretched, as if in supplication. It was Lady Hester Charnwood who had discovered the Countess. She had not screamed. She had not even gasped. But she had stood for a long moment in the doorway, hands lightly clasped, before ringing the bell for Hargrave, and saying only, "I believe the Countess has expired. Kindly inform the police." Within the hour, the local inspector, Mr. Ellicott, a broad-shouldered man with a prematurely balding head and the air of a confused sheepdog, was pacing the gravel drive in his thick-soled boots. He was not fond of the gentry, nor of their many rooms and whispered tensions, but he was painfully aware that Charnwood Grange was not the sort of place where people ought to be found dead before breakfast. The body, to his eye, bore no outward signs of violence. The Countess's head was tilted gently against the chair leg, her lips slightly parted, her expression surprisingly calm. A cup of untouched tea rested on the side table, its contents now cold and still. But something about the scene disturbed him. Perhaps it was the unnatural stillness of the blue silk dress. It had pooled strangely about her ankles, as though its owner had simply melted downward. Dr. Havers was summoned. Poison was mentioned. Fainting spells speculated upon. The Countess's luggage was examined, her jewellery left untouched, her room in perfect order. She had arrived only the day before. By midday, it had been established that the Countess had dined with the family. Lord Charnwood, Lady Hester, their daughter Celia, and the young painter Lucian Drake, currently under commission to capture a likeness of the estate. Conversation had been formal. The meal had been a cold game pie and syllabub. The Countess had retired early, citing the fatigue of travel from Vienna. No one had seen her after 9:30. No signs of a break-in, no motive, no struggle, no marks. It was, in short, the sort of death that one wished to believe was natural. But then came the issue of the fabric. It was Hargrave who first mentioned it, quietly, almost apologetically. "Begging your pardon, sir," she had said to Inspector Ellicott, as he stood awkwardly before a room of silent, polished furniture and unspeaking relatives. "But the Countess's dress this morning was not the same one she wore last night. I would have bet my pension on it. Last evening she wore grey satin with Austrian lace. I recall fastening the clasp myself. And this?" Ellicott gestured at the blue silk. "I've never seen it before, and it has no label, no seamstress mark, no initials. And, sir, the hem appears to have been hand-stitched. Recently." There was a silence at this pronouncement, a heavy one, the kind that fills space not with confusion, but recognition unspoken. Lady Hester rose, folded her gloves precisely, and said, "I believe it is time to notify Mr. Hercule Poirot. This is a matter for delicacy and precision." Poirot arrived the following morning, bundled against the wind in a dove-grey overcoat, a bowler hat perfectly level, and an expression of studied neutrality. Hastings, who accompanied him, made no such effort to conceal his curiosity. "The Countess de Vries?" he asked quietly, as they passed through the high iron gates. "A woman of taste," Poirot replied, "and discretion. She is not what she seemed, Hastings." "Oh." She was once a lady-in-waiting, a confidant, and once before the war, a name whispered in the salons of Vienna, scandal, politics, disappearances. Always around her, a perfume of intrigue. Then you suspect foul play? My friend, Poirot said, pausing to adjust his cuffs as the door to Charnwood Grange opened before them. When a woman dies, wearing a dress that did not exist the night before. Oui, I suspect something. Lord Charnwood was the embodiment of weary English aristocracy. Neat moustache, thinning hair, and a look of polite detachment. He expressed his condolences to Poirot with the subdued politeness of a man apologizing for poor weather. Lady Hester, however, was alert, elegant, and curiously unbothered. She was a friend from my husband's past, she said. An old connection. We hosted her out of courtesy. Was she well received? She was not disliked, said Hester carefully. But she did not belong. She asked questions, old questions, about the war, about Vienna, about Silk. Poirot tilted his head. Silk? She said something curious last night, that the dead leave behind only two things, secrets and fabric. I thought it poetic, if a little macabre. Très intéressant, Poirot murmured. And who else was present? She named the others, Celia, their daughter, whose sudden engagement to the young painter Lucien Drake had startled the local gossip circles. Lucien himself, charming, dishevelled, poor as paintbrushes, and Hargrave, the housekeeper, who had served the Charnwoods for nearly 3 decades, and whose word was gospel beneath the high beams of the Grange. Forgive me, Poirot said, but one more question. Did the Countess bring much luggage? Only one case, Hester replied. A brown leather valise. I remember it distinctly. And yet the dress she died in, Poirot said, was not among her things last night. Lady Hester's mouth tightened. Number it was not. Later, Poirot stood alone in the breakfast room. He touched nothing. He merely observed. The gleam of the floor, the angle of the chair leg, the faint indentation in the carpet, a single thread of silk snagged on the windowsill. He bent, gently plucked it, and held it up to the light. Blue, he said softly, but not from the dress. This thread. This is older. He pocketed it without another word. Outside, the gardener was trimming the rose hedges. Inside, the silence was beginning to pull at the seams. And high in the east wing, a young woman in pearl earrings stood before a mirror, holding a bolt of blue silk that should no longer exist. She touched its hem and smiled. Celia Charnwood was not the type of young woman one might expect to be at the centre of any scandal. That, perhaps, was why Poirot paid her particular attention. She stood with the quiet composure of someone raised among walls that absorbed sound rather than echoed it. Tall, with ash-blonde hair drawn back in a chignon too old for her years, she greeted Poirot with grace, but her hands, delicate and pale, twisted ever so slightly in her lap as she offered him tea in the south drawing-room. She wore green that morning, a soft wool trimmed at the cuffs, but Poirot noted the absence of blue. The Countess and I barely knew one another, she said, after the necessary pleasantries. She arrived and simply watched. I had the feeling she was looking for something. Poirot inclined his head. Did she speak to you? Ask you questions, perhaps? Celia looked out toward the lawn, where the gardener still trimmed hedges. She asked about my mother, about Vienna, but only in passing. I thought it odd. Mother has never been to Austria. Did she ask you about fabric? Celia blinked. Fabric? Yes. Silk, perhaps, or something to do with clothing. A pause. Only once. She admired a scarf I wore yesterday, said the weave was familiar. And was it? I don't know. It's old. Belonged to my grandmother. I wore it at breakfast. Poirot smiled gently. But the Countess did not attend breakfast yesterday. No, that's right. She stopped. No. She must have seen it earlier. I passed her on the stairs in the morning. Poirot said nothing, but he remembered the housekeeper's words, that the Countess had not come down at all before luncheon. He rose, thanking her, and as she turned to refill the tea, his eye caught the edge of a small blue thread clinging to the inside of her sleeve. Not the shade of her wool, a little too rich, a little too close to silk. He made no comment. Lucien Drake was found in the studio above the carriage house, barefoot, covered in a fine film of charcoal dust, and humming a tune that sounded faintly like something from Offenbach. He was the sort of man who could smile and seem apologetic without actually conceding a thing, and Poirot disliked him almost immediately. "The Countess?" Lucien said, setting aside his palette knife. "Tragic business. She had wonderful cheekbones. I'd hoped to sketch her before she left." "You had not begun?" Lucien laughed. "She declined, said portraits captured lies, not faces. But we did talk." "About?" "Vienna. She was full of stories. I think she recognized me." Poirot's brow arched. "Had you met before?" "Not that I recall, but she asked if I was the son of Julian Drake. I said I didn't know. Never met him." "You do not know your father?" Lucien shrugged. "My mother never spoke of him. I was raised by a great aunt. But the Countess said something strange. She said she remembered a boy who slept beneath a table in a silk shop during air raids. I had no idea what she meant." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And what did you say to her in response?" "That I preferred oil to silk. She didn't laugh." "Did she seem distressed by this memory?" Lucien's hand hovered near a sketch. "Not distressed, disappointed. I think she was hoping I'd remember something I couldn't." Poirot nodded slowly. "And you were with the family all evening?" "Yes, of course." "Even after the meal?" Lucien hesitated. "Well, I stepped out briefly. Needed air. It was warm in the dining room. But I came back. Lady Hester will confirm." "And what were you wearing?" Lucien gave him a bemused look. "A dinner jacket, black, slightly ink-stained, and certainly not silk, if that's what you're asking." Poirot said nothing, but let the silence linger, like a net drifting in water. Eventually, Lucien folded his arms and smiled again, too quickly. Poirot found Hargrave outside the larder, cataloguing preserves. She curtsied with dignity, still holding a jar of quince jam. "I understand you knew the Countess from years past," Poirot said gently. Hargrave did not flinch. "I knew of her, Monsieur Poirot. I was a young maid in Vienna once, before I came to Charnwood. That was another life. And the Countess, what was she in that life?" "Sharp," Hargrave said after a pause. "Clever. She kept secrets the way some women kept lockets, tied close to the heart, but always visible if you knew where to look." "And what secrets did she bring here?" "She didn't say, but she asked about people, names from long ago, old loyalties. There was something she was trying to find." Poirot glanced at the jar in her hand. "You recognize the dress she wore this morning?" "Number that fabric was not part of her luggage. Then it was stitched here." Hargrave did not meet his eyes. "We have sewing supplies, naturally. Lady Hester still prefers repairs done in-house. But the blue silk? I've never seen it in the house stores. Could it have come from a dress once owned by someone else?" "It could have." That evening, Poirot dined with the family. The air was thin with tension. The empty place at the table, the Countess's place, had not been removed. It sat there, a silent reproach, with its unlit candle and untouched bread plate. Lady Hester carved the duck with mechanical precision. Lord Charnwood spoke of government committees. Celia said nothing. Lucien smiled too often. Only Poirot ate heartily, taking in not just the food, but the tableau. After dinner, he requested to view the Countess's room. It was as he expected. Precise, minimal, but wrong. The case was packed neatly, too neatly. Only 2 dresses remained hanging. Neither was blue. The drawer that held accessories was empty save a small sachet that smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs, and beneath the bed, a single pearl button. He turned it over in his fingers, then glanced toward the vanity table. A faint dusting of powder lay across the wood, but no hairbrush, no comb, no mirror. He stepped back, tilting his head, and his eyes fixed on a painting above the hearth. A pastoral scene. A woman in a blue shawl, standing beside a stream. He moved closer. There, faint but deliberate, was an alteration. The shawl, originally grey, had been carefully painted over. The colour beneath was still visible along the edges. Someone, he thought, was rewriting the past with their palette, literally and figuratively. That night, Poirot sat in the drawing-room, alone. The fire burned low. He placed the pearl button on the arm of the chair. Then, very deliberately, he opened the folded thread of blue silk he had pocketed earlier. It was finer than the dress fabric, not torn from a hem, but perhaps from a lining. A secret pocket? He reached into his coat and produced something else. A telegram received that afternoon, but kept folded until now. It was from Vienna. De Vries was not travelling under real name. True identity: Baroness Elsa von Brunn, last seen 1928. Blue silk associated with Royal Austrian émigrés. Code fabric, used to identify escaped couriers. Discontinued 1933. He read it twice, then folded it again and placed it inside his inner pocket. The fabric, then, was not only fashion, it was a signal, a message, and someone here had understood it. Outside, in the hallway, a door creaked gently. Poirot looked up, the firelight catching the gleam in his eyes. He rose. Quietly, precisely, and with his hands behind his back, he stepped into the corridor. Somewhere ahead, a lock clicked, and the blue silk moved again. The corridor was dim, lit only by the low firelight filtering from the drawing-room behind him. Poirot moved without haste, his steps silent on the thick rug. Ahead, the faint creak of movement, too precise to be the settling of old beams, too purposeful to be wind, drew his attention toward the narrow door at the end of the passage, the linen closet seldom used, its brass handle still faintly gleaming. He reached it, pressed his ear to the door, and waited. Silence. Then, softly, the whisper of fabric brushing wood. He opened the door without drama. Celia Charnwood stood within, her arms curled around something held close to her chest. Her breath caught when she saw him. She did not drop what she held, but she stepped back, as though shielding it from him with her body. "I wasn't stealing," she said, not quite defensively. "It isn't even... I didn't think anyone would notice it was missing." Poirot's gaze moved past her to what she held, folded carefully, like something once treasured, a length of blue silk. Not a full dress, but remnants. Cuttings, a torn sleeve, a bodice ripped from its hem. "Where did you find it, mademoiselle?" She blinked. "In the scullery, wrapped in newspaper, hidden beneath the kindling. It smelled faintly of lavender. I recognized it, something about the weave, the same as the scarf I wore yesterday." "You did not bring this to your parents, or to the police?" "No," she said. "I don't know why. I suppose I thought, if someone meant to destroy it, they might try again." Poirot stepped into the closet, his hands clasped behind his back. "And yet you did not destroy it. You came here to hide it again." Her eyes dropped. "I suppose I needed to hold it first." He inclined his head. "Mademoiselle, what do you know of Vienna?" "Nothing," she said quickly, too quickly, then added, "Only stories." "Stories?" She hesitated. "When I was small, my grandmother would speak of a dress shop there. She called it a salon, but really it was just a set of rooms above a tobacconist. She said she sewed for royalty, for women who wore masks, both literal and not. My mother forbade her to speak of it, said the past was best left closed in drawers." Did your grandmother ever mention the Baroness von Brunn? Celia blinked. That was her name. My grandmother. Elsa. Poirot remained very still. And you are certain of this? She died when I was 12. But yes, I remember the name. It was on an old letter she kept hidden in a book. He looked again at the silk. Then I fear, mademoiselle, that the Countess de Vries came here not as a guest, but as someone returning to a memory long buried. Celia's voice lowered. She called me Liebling once. I thought she was mistaking me for someone else. Poirot took the silk from her gently, and his fingers moved across the hem until he found what he was seeking. A single embroidered symbol, so faint it appeared almost a flaw in the weave. A loop, a circle within a triangle, not decorative, not random. He folded it again. I must speak with your mother. Lady Hester Charnwood was waiting. She had changed into mourning grey, her hair twisted back into a chignon that mirrored her daughter's. She was seated in the library, a place rarely used except for the annual Christmas reading, and she was staring into the empty grate when Poirot was shown in. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he placed the silk on the writing desk beside her. She looked at it without surprise. I thought we had burned it. We, my husband and I, after the war, after we believed she had died. Poirot's silence stretched. Lady Hester turned toward him. You know who she was, don't you? I know who she was, he replied. I do not yet know who she had become. Lady Hester allowed herself a small breath. Elsa and I were friends. We met during the final winter of the occupation. She had lost everything. Her title, her home, her family. What she had left was secrets. She passed information for the Allies. Fabric was her cipher. Each garment she sewed carried messages. And this house? She came here once for shelter. I was newly married. My husband had ties to the Foreign Office. He arranged for her to disappear, to England, with a new identity. But when the war ended, Elsa did not want the life she had inherited. She tried to reclaim her past. She wanted it all back. Her name, her house in Vienna, even her child. Poirot's expression did not change. Her child? Lady Hester looked up at him fully now, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. She left her daughter behind during the war, gave her to friends. When she returned for her, they were gone. The records lost, the child untraceable. Elsa never stopped searching, but the trail led to too many doors. And one of them, Poirot said quietly, was here. Yes. Poirot's voice softened. Celia is not your daughter. Number she is hers. And your husband? New. We adopted her officially, quietly. It was arranged through the embassy. Poirot walked to the window. The garden was flooded with afternoon light. A breeze disturbed the hedges. She did not come here to accuse you, he said. She came to see the life her daughter had been given. Lady Hester's voice was dry. Then why did she wear that fabric again? Why the blue silk? Why remind us? Because, Poirot said, she wanted to see if anyone still remembered what it meant. Later that evening, Poirot returned to the artist's studio. Lucien Drake was not painting. He was smoking, barefoot again, standing before a half-finished portrait that did not resemble anyone in particular. The room smelled of turpentine and something older, perhaps dusted velvet, perhaps loss. I've been waiting, Lucien said, as Poirot entered. For what, Monsieur Drake? For you to ask me what I really remember. Poirot approached slowly. Do you? Lucien flicked ash into a chipped mug. Not clearly. I remember a room that always smelled of starch and perfume. A woman who called me Petit Fantôme. I remember her crying when she buttoned my coat. You knew the Countess. I knew the woman she used to be. But I didn't. Remember until she looked at me that night and said my name. Not the name I have now. The name she gave me once. Poirot let the silence deepen. She came to me after dinner, Lucien continued. Asked if I'd kept the ribbon she gave me. I didn't understand. I thought she was mad. But when I left the room, I found it, hidden in the lining of an old paint satchel, a piece of blue silk, tied in a knot. Poirot stepped closer. And then, Lucien's voice dropped. I brought it to her. Late that night. She was awake, dressed in grey. She cried when she saw it. And then she changed? She asked me to give her something to wear, something of mine. She said she wanted to disappear again, but this time, beautifully. I didn't understand then. I gave her the silk dress I'd been using in a study, one I'd bought years ago at a market stall. I thought she simply liked the fabric. Poirot's voice was barely above a whisper. You stitched it for her? Yes. She died in it. Lucien's hand trembled slightly. I found her like that in the morning. I panicked. I thought if they saw the dress, if they knew, they would question your past. He nodded once. So I undressed her, changed her back, hid the blue silk in the scullery. Poirot did not move. I didn't kill her, Lucien said, but I remembered too late. And when I did, I didn't know how to let go. Poirot turned to the open window. The wind moved the curtain like a hand brushing the air. Sometimes, he said, it is not memory that binds us, monsieur, but the shape of what we have tried not to remember. Lucien's voice cracked. She said she forgave me before she went to sleep. Poirot turned. Then perhaps she did. And he left the studio without another word. The morning after Poirot's conversation with Lucien Drake, the house felt changed. Not overtly. Hargrave still served breakfast with the same rigid elegance, Lord Charnwood still muttered into his paper, and Celia still added milk before tea, as if unaware that this quirk had once, decades earlier, identified a spy in a salon above the Danube. But beneath these ordinary movements lay something disturbed, as though the air itself had shifted, and everyone inside the house now breathed with caution. Poirot did not attend breakfast. Instead, he walked the gardens in a long circuit, stopping at intervals to examine seemingly insignificant details, the pattern of footsteps near the orchard gate, the garden bench angled just slightly away from the path, the faint drag mark in the gravel beside the rose border. It was not evidence he sought, but arrangement, order, a narrative shaped not by facts, but by human impulse, the great disorder he was always trying to tidy. When he returned indoors, Hargrave met him with a faint frown and a message. Lady Hester would like a word, monsieur, in the west drawing-room. He nodded, removed his gloves, and followed without speaking. She was already standing when he entered, her hands clasped tightly, the morning sun falling in hard lines through the tall windows. There is something I didn't tell you yesterday, she said, before he could even close the door behind him. Poirot offered only the smallest nod. I am listening. She turned toward the fireplace, though it was unlit. I received a letter from Elsa, the day before she arrived. It was brief, but it said only, I have found her. She is safe, but someone else knows. The blue silk still speaks. And you said nothing? I didn't believe it meant anything. I thought it was another of her poetic illusions. She always had a flair for the theatrical. Poirot walked slowly to the writing desk. Did you keep the letter? Number 1 burned it. That night. Before or after dinner? She hesitated. After, when everyone had gone up. Poirot turned. You feared what it meant. I feared what might follow, she said quietly. There are names from that time. Connections. The war buried many things, Monsieur Poirot. Not all of them stayed dead. He gave a small nod, then glanced at the sideboard, where a single blue vase sat alone, emptied of its usual daffodils. You believe someone in this house understood her message? Lady Hester looked at him. I think someone misunderstood it, or remembered something they would rather forget. Poirot's eyes met hers. Then it is time to find out who. He left her there, standing by the cold hearth, the weight of old allegiances in her posture. By mid-morning, the inspector had returned. Inspector Ellicott, ever solid in his consternation, now looked more unsettled than usual. Poirot greeted him at the base of the stairs. "There's news," Ellicott said. "Toxicology report from London. Trace elements of digitalis in the Countess's blood. Enough to slow the heart, not enough to kill her." Poirot's brows lifted slightly, but perhaps enough to make her sleep so deeply she did not wake when the body was moved. Ellicott frowned. "You think she was moved?" "I do not think," Poirot said mildly. "I know. Her death did not take place in the breakfast room." "Where then?" "That," said Poirot, "is what we shall now establish." With Ellicott in tow, Poirot ascended the stairs to the east wing, where the guest rooms lay. He entered the Countess's room again, surveyed it anew, and this time crossed to the bed. "She was found on the floor, in the other room," Poirot said. "But here, look, this pillow, pressed at the center, flat along the sides, as if someone lay here for hours. And this," he gestured to the carpet beside the bed, "there is the faintest indentation. A kneeling figure, I believe. Someone stayed beside her, after she lost consciousness." Ellicott scratched his head. "A nurse? Or someone seeking comfort? Or perhaps remorse?" Poirot moved to the wardrobe, then to the vanity. His gaze caught again on the absence of a hairbrush, a comb. He opened the drawer slowly, and found what he had expected. A small vial, nearly empty, marked only with the embossed label of a London chemist. Ellicott read it aloud. "Tincture of digitalis," prescribed. Poirot nodded. She was not murdered, not in the ordinary sense. She took the dose herself, perhaps more than she intended, perhaps precisely what she intended. But someone moved her body. Yes. Poirot turned from the drawer and faced the room fully. The blue silk, she wore it by choice, as a message. She wanted someone to see her in it, to know who she had been, what she had once carried. But who? That, my friend, is why we must speak to Lord Charnwood. They found him in the conservatory, reading a gardening journal with more concentration than necessary. He looked up, set his glasses aside, and met Poirot's gaze without greeting. "She came to see me that night," he said, before being prompted. "Elsa." Poirot did not feign surprise. "She told me what she knew," Lord Charnwood continued, "that she had found Celia, that she did not want to take her away, only to be near, to see what kind of life she had been given. She said she had watched from afar for years, but someone had written to her, an anonymous letter, warning her that Celia was in danger." "Danger?" Poirot repeated. "She wouldn't say more, only that she believed the past was catching up. She said the blue silk was meant to protect Celia, to signal that the line still held. Then she died that night. I thought she was sleeping. I found her slumped in the chair. I checked her pulse. It was weak, but there. I stayed beside her for an hour. When I returned later, she was cold. And you moved her." "I didn't know what else to do. I thought the dress would raise questions. Old questions. Political questions. So I changed her clothes. I laid her in the breakfast room and called Hargrave. I thought it would end quietly." Poirot watched him closely. "But there is still the letter, the one Elsa received, the anonymous threat. You never sent it?" "No." "Then who did?" It was Hastings who brought the answer. He arrived at Poirot's side late that evening, holding a small envelope he'd retrieved from the local postmaster. It had been redirected from London, held in the office due to incomplete return details. Poirot opened it without ceremony. Inside, a single card, handwritten. "She is not safe. The blue silk was seen. Someone remembers." No signature, but the paper was of a particular make, thick, cream-coloured, with faint impressions along the border. Poirot turned it over and held it to the light. Embossed in one corner, barely visible, a monogram, C.H. He closed the card, tucked it into his pocket, and stared out the window. Lady Hester had told the truth. Lord Charnwood had acted out of fear. Lucienne had remembered too late. But someone with sharp penmanship and access to monogrammed stationery, had tried to frighten a ghost. C.H., not Celia, not Hester, but Poirot's eyes narrowed. In the far parlour, Hargrave was setting out silver for tea. Her fingers, gloved as always, moved deftly, silently. But Poirot watched her movements with the weight of understanding now. He turned and crossed the corridor toward her, every step precise. Because the letter had not been meant to protect Celia. It had been meant to warn Elsa, and the past had not stayed buried. It had simply waited for the blue silk to speak again. Poirot entered the far parlour with quiet deliberation. Hargrave, bent over the silver tray, did not look up, but he saw the subtle shift in her shoulders. Her hands paused only a fraction too long before resuming their practiced rhythm, the kind honed by decades of quiet service, of hearing everything and speaking nothing. He did not speak at once. He waited as she aligned the sugar tongs, as she smoothed the linen doily beneath the plate of scones. Only when she reached for the teapot did he say softly, "You wrote the letter." She did not start, but her eyes lifted to meet his, and something behind them, long kept and carefully bound, loosened. She straightened slowly. "You shouldn't say things you don't mean, Monsieur Poirot." "But I do mean them," he replied gently. "The handwriting matches a note I glimpsed once in the steward's ledger. Your initials, Clara Hargrave, and the stationery, from the locked desk in the East Library, the one only you keep the key for." She pressed her lips together. "I never meant for harm to come to her." "I believe you," he said, "but intent is not always the twin of consequence. Why warn her, if not to protect her?" Hargrave looked down at the polished tray, then turned and sank into the chair beside the window, her gloves folded in her lap. "She had no right to come back," she said. "Not after all this time, not to that girl. You cared for Celia. I raised her. From the moment she was carried into this house, she was mine to protect. I gave her bottles. I walked the floors with her through nights of fever. When her teeth came in crooked, I stitched cloth soaked in brandy. I read to her every night until she could read to me. I was there when she took her first step. Lady Hester was in London. And you feared what Elsa's return would mean." Hargrave's hands tightened. Elsa was never cruel, but she was dangerous. She played with secrets like they were scraps of ribbon. And when the war ended, she disappeared as easily as she had arrived, leaving only ghosts. And now, decades later, she returns with symbols sewn into her dress, with riddles and clues and talk of silk that still speaks. What was I to think? You thought she had come to claim her child. I thought she would undo everything we had built. Hargrave's voice dropped to a hush. She looked at Celia the way a woman looks at a mirror. But the glass no longer matched the memory. And I had to do something. Poirot sat opposite her. "So you wrote the letter, anonymously. You meant to frighten her away. I knew her pride. I thought if she feared she'd been discovered, she'd vanish again. I didn't mean for her to die. But when she did," Poirot said, "you helped conceal it. You knew the silk was missing. You saw Lucian hide it." Hargrave's eyes flicked toward the hearth. "He came into the scullery in the dark. I was in the pantry. I saw him through the door, wrapping something in paper, burying it beneath the kindling. I waited until he left, and then I moved it. Why not destroy it? I couldn't." Her voice faltered. "It was beautiful, terrible, but beautiful. I thought, perhaps someday Celia should see it, understand it, but not now. Not like this. Poirot nodded slowly. Then it is time she understands more. He left Hargrave seated in silence, the silver tray untouched. In the corridor, Hastings waited, eyes wide, hands deep in his coat pockets. "My dear fellow," he murmured, "was she the villain all along?" Poirot shook his head. "No, Hastings, only the guardian of a fragile story. But it is time now for the truth to have its moment, even if it breaks the silence." That evening, Poirot gathered them in the drawing-room. The fire had been lit, though the air was already heavy with summer. The curtains were drawn. The silence was brittle. Lady Hester sat nearest the hearth, her hands folded in her lap. Lord Charnwood stood by the bookcase, posture stiff. Lucien hovered near the piano, not playing. Celia sat on the edge of the settee, her expression unreadable. Hargrave remained in the corner, half-shadowed, her face turned away. Poirot, immaculate as ever, stood before the mantelpiece. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we are gathered not for accusation, but for revelation. The truth, as I have found it, lies not in fingerprints or fibers, but in psychology, in what people remember and what they cannot forget." He looked to Celia. "You were told a story, that you were born to Lady Hester, that you were raised in this house by right. But the truth, mademoiselle, is that you were born elsewhere, in Vienna, to a woman called Elsa von Brunn." A breath caught in Celia's throat, but she did not interrupt. She was a courier, a smuggler of truths in silken hems. When the war ended, she was forced to flee, leaving behind the child she could no longer keep safe. That child was you. You were brought here, adopted by the Charnwoods with the help of diplomatic arrangements, raised in England with a new name, a new life. Celia spoke then, her voice quiet. "I always knew. Somewhere." Poirot nodded. "Because memory is not only what is told to us, it is what we carry, the feel of fabric, a scent, a lullaby. The Countess came not to steal you away, but to witness what had become of her child, to see if she had been loved." "And she found out," Celia whispered. "She did," Poirot said. "But she also feared. Someone had sent her a letter, an anonymous warning, not of violence, but of danger, of old truths awakening. That person was Madame Hargrave." All eyes turned. Hargrave bowed her head. "She did not wish to harm," Poirot continued, "only to protect. But secrecy breeds misunderstanding. And when the Countess took a tincture, intended perhaps to numb the pain of memory, it slowed her heart. She fell asleep. Lucien found her like that, and thinking she had died, panicked. He changed her clothes, removing the blue silk, a symbol he did not yet understand. He hid it. Hargrave found it and concealed it again." Lucien spoke, hoarsely. "She forgave me, before she slept." "I believe she did," Poirot said. "She chose to wear the silk again, as a message, a signal from the past. She did not expect to die that night, but she wished to leave a trace. And in doing so, she bound all of you together once more in the thread of that fabric." He looked around the room, then stepped aside. From the hallway, a constable entered, bearing a small package wrapped in pale cloth. Poirot opened it carefully, and from within unfolded the silk dress, creased now, faintly scented but intact. He laid it gently across the arm of the chair. Celia rose slowly and crossed to it. Her fingers traced the stitching, the tiny embroidered mark near the seam. "She made this," she said. "Yes," Poirot said. "For you, once, long ago." The silence held, not cold now, but heavy with things understood too late. Lady Hester spoke last. "She asked me not to tell her, to let her grow into herself, not a legacy. But perhaps we waited too long." Poirot inclined his head. "It is not too late, madame. The silk has spoken, and you have listened." He turned to leave, his coat already buttoned, his gloves neatly folded. Outside, the air was cooling. A breeze passed through the open door, lifting the edges of the silk ever so slightly, as though stirred by a hand no longer present, but still remembered. Poirot stepped into the night, and behind him the house began to breathe again. Poirot did not return to the village inn that evening. Instead, he remained seated in the library long after the household had retired, with only the low tick of the mantel clock and the whisper of leaves outside to accompany him. The fire had gone out. His cup of tisane cooled beside him, untouched. His gaze remained on the folded silk that now lay in a small glass case atop the desk. Lady Hester's idea, perhaps symbolic reparation, a tribute, a confession. But Poirot was not yet finished. There was something still wrong. Not with the story. The fabric of the past had been sewn together with careful threads. Celia's parentage, the Countess's motive, Hargrave's anonymous letter, Lucian's panic, all of it sat neatly before him, like garments folded in a trunk. And yet one seam bulged. He reviewed it silently. The Countess had taken a tincture of digitalis. That much was clear from the report. The dosage was not lethal, but sufficient to sedate. That she died in her sleep, this too could be accepted. She was not young, her heart was not strong. But Poirot had reviewed her medical records from Vienna, quietly requested days before. And those records showed no diagnosis of heart arrhythmia, no prescription for digitalis, no medical need for it at all. The vial had come from a London chemist. No name on the prescription label, only a number. Poirot had sent Hastings to inquire discreetly, and now, on the desk before him, lay the note his friend had returned with that afternoon. The prescription had been filled a month ago, by a man named Lucien Drake. The paper burned slowly in the grate as dawn rose behind the windows. By breakfast, Poirot had made his decision. He requested Lucien join him for a walk. No theatrics, no police, no audience. The painter appeared subdued, as if the last day had drained something from him that he wasn't certain he'd recover. He wore a scarf now, despite the warmth, his cuffs frayed, his hands ink-stained again. They strolled the gardens in silence for a time, past the rose border, the stone wall where ivy clung in slow descent. Poirot finally spoke, without looking at him. "You bought the tincture?" Lucien's steps did not break, but the breath he took was audible. "Yes." "Why?" "I didn't intend for her to die." "But you gave her the means to." Lucien stopped. "She asked for it, not by name, but she said she needed something for her nerves. She said the past would return with a scream if she didn't quiet it." "And you gave it to her, without asking why?" "I didn't want to know," Lucien said, his voice raw. "I was afraid if I asked, she would tell me, and once she told me, I couldn't pretend I wasn't involved." Poirot nodded slowly. "You still loved her. Not as a mother, but as a mystery you never solved. When she looked at you, you saw the boy you might have been, and you were afraid she saw the same." Lucien rubbed his face with the back of his hand. "I didn't mean for any of it. I didn't know how to hold it all, what she wanted, what I remembered, what it meant to anyone else. She did not blame you." "I know." Poirot turned to him. "But you still have not told me why she changed into the blue silk." Lucien's voice dropped. "Because I asked her to." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "I said it would be beautiful, that if she wanted to disappear, to feel like herself again, it should be in something of her making. I thought it would comfort her. She laughed, said I didn't understand, that it was not about comfort. It was about code, but she put it on anyway." Poirot paused. "You watched her sleep." Lucien nodded once. "And when I came back later, she wasn't breathing." Poirot let the moment hang. "And then you became an artist again. You changed the scene. You edited the light. You removed the detail that would ruin the composition." "I thought it was mercy," Lucien whispered. Poirot said nothing more. They walked back to the house in silence. But Poirot did not return inside. Instead, he stepped to the far side of the garden, where the hedge grew thickest, and paused before a rusted iron gate, barely visible beneath the green. It led to the potting shed, once used by the gardener, now fallen into disuse. He entered. The scent of soil and wood rot lingered in the dimness. But on the old work table lay something incongruous, a sketchbook. He opened it. The first pages were tentative, portraits of Celia, half finished, not quite accurate. Then Elsa, drawn from memory, softer, her eyes less guarded. Then a page unlike the others, a woman in a dress of blue silk, seated before a mirror, looking not at her reflection, but beyond it, into the artist's eyes. The last page showed the same figure, eyes closed now, head tilted slightly back, as if sleeping. Poirot closed the book and stood very still. Later that day he called Inspector Ellicott back to the house. There would be no arrest, no charge, but the official report would now include the name of the man who procured the tincture, who concealed the truth, not out of malice, but out of longing. Poirot left the sketchbook with Lady Hester. She did not ask where it had come from. As the sun began to dip, he found Celia alone on the terrace. The silk dress still lay folded in the glass case. She watched it now the way one watches the sea, something too large to hold, too familiar to look away from. "She loved you," Poirot said quietly. Celia nodded. "Even when she didn't know me. She knew you, from the moment you stood in that doorway. She looked at me like I was a beginning she never had. It frightened me." Poirot offered her a faint smile. "Beginnings do, even the ones that come too late." Celia turned toward him. "What am I supposed to do with all of this?" "Whatever you choose," he said. "There is no obligation in blood, only in truth." She looked down at her hands. "I want to make something from it. Not a dress, not a painting, but something else." Poirot inclined his head. "Then you must, one thread at a time." He left her there, the blue silk glowing faintly under glass, and made his way toward the car waiting at the end of the drive. As the vehicle pulled away from Charnwood Grange, the wind rose behind it, moving through the tall hedges, lifting petals from the rose bushes, and scattering them across the gravel, like confetti from a wedding long past. And in the silence that followed, the house seemed, at last, to exhale. The drive away from Charnwood Grange was silent. Poirot sat upright, his small leather case beside him, gloved hands resting neatly upon his lap. Hastings, behind the wheel of the borrowed motor-car, kept his eyes on the narrowing road, but glanced occasionally at his companion, waiting for that small intake of breath, that subtle shift in posture, which always came just before a pronouncement. None came. It wasn't until they passed the old milestone marker and turned toward the village road that Poirot finally spoke. "There is one thing still unsolved, Hastings." His tone was not dramatic. It was quiet, measured, but it was enough. Hastings blinked. "Still?" "I thought it all rather neatly tied together. Hargrave's letter, Lucien's panic, the digitalis, surely that closes the affair." "Ah, non," Poirot murmured. "You mistake a finished story for a solved one. There is something that continues to resist my order, something that does not fit." Hastings frowned, slowing as a tractor crossed the narrow lane. "What exactly?" Poirot folded his hands more tightly. "The sketchbook. You said it was Lucien's." "It was. The contents were his. The hand, unmistakably. But the placement, Hastings, the placement was not." "You mean where it was found?" Poirot nodded. "The potting shed. Why would he hide his drawings there? Why leave a record of what he concealed, his presence, his guilt, where any member of the staff might find it? Well, perhaps he meant it to be found eventually." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but it was too carefully placed, too deliberate, no dust, No moisture. Wrapped in oilskin. Left exactly where I would find it, should I go looking for inconsistencies. But that's good, isn't it? Poirot's gaze shifted toward the hedgerows outside the window. It is too good. They arrived at the inn by mid-afternoon. Poirot retired briefly to his room, requesting tea and his usual plain biscuit, but took neither. Instead, he opened his notebook. He reviewed each detail again, not the facts, but the emotions. Not the words said aloud, but the pauses between them. Celia's silence, Hargrave's protectiveness, Lady Hester's control, Lucien's collapse, and the Countess, her stillness, her precision, her choice to wear the blue silk one last time. What had she really come for? Not just a glimpse of the daughter she lost, that she had already achieved in the first few minutes of her arrival. Not vengeance, not even recognition. She had said to Lord Charnwood that the blue silk would signal that the line still held. What line? Poirot flipped to a new page in his notebook and drew a line himself. A simple stroke, horizontal. Then 3 small notches beneath it. He stared at them. 3 threads. The Countess, Celia, Lucienne. He tapped the pen. There had always been the possibility, unspoken, politely avoided, that Elsa had had more than one child. What if the message sewn into the blue silk was not for Celia? What if it had been for Lucien? At that moment, a knock came at his door. Hastings entered with a telegram, brow furrowed. "From Vienna," he said, offering the paper. "I asked them to look deeper into the adoption files. You'll want to see this." Poirot read it once, then twice. Archival records confirm Baroness Elsa von Brunn gave birth to twins, female and male, September 1923. Boy registered separately due to mother's request. No father recorded. Boy transferred to Relief Orphanage during final war months. No adoption file found. He folded the telegram slowly. "Nom de nom," he whispered. It was not about forgiveness. It was about protection. Hastings stared. Twins. But, then Lucienne and Celia. "Yes," Poirot said, rising. Half a mirror each. One raised in silk, the other in soot. Neither knowing why they looked slightly alike, neither understanding the echo. And she came to see them both, together, one last time. He crossed the room, already gathering his coat. But if she found him, Hastings said, if she knew, why not tell them? Poirot's expression darkened, because someone didn't want them to know. He returned to Charnwood Grange under the pretext of a forgotten item, but when Hargrave opened the door, she read the truth in his face. "There is more," she said softly. "We." He did not ask for the others, not yet. He followed her into the morning room, where the shadows clung more stubbornly in the corners. The case of blue silk still sat there, glinting faintly. "She told you," he said, "didn't she? The Countess. She told you she had another child." Hargrave sat down heavily, as if the act of withholding had weighed her bones. She said it only once. After Celia had gone to bed, she said she'd found him at last, that he had her hands, that he had forgotten her face but remembered her voice. She was happy, Poirot, almost frightened by how happy. "And you, what did you do?" "I begged her to keep it quiet, just for a while. I thought it would complicate everything, that Lord Charnwood wouldn't abide the scandal, that Celia, she had just gotten engaged, the painter was already a complication." She broke off. Poirot waited. "I didn't poison her," she said quietly. "No," Poirot agreed. "But you saw the vial." "I did." "You didn't give it to her, but you saw it, and you made no effort to stop her." "She said she was tired," Hargrave whispered. "She asked me to brush her hair. I hadn't done that since Celia was a baby. And afterward, she looked at herself in the mirror and said, 'I look like myself again.' I didn't think she meant—" Poirot's voice was quiet, But she did. Hargrave looked away. She said the silk would speak for her, that when it was found it would tell them both. But she never said how, or what it meant. She never needed to, Poirot replied. She believed the truth would rise from the fabric. He turned toward the door. And it has. An hour later, they were gathered again. Poirot, standing once more before the hearth. Celia seated. Lucien beside her, not touching, but close enough that the air between them pulsed. Lady Hester did not speak. Lord Charnwood stood in silence, rigid as ever. Poirot's voice was soft. Elsa von Brunn had 2 children, a girl and a boy. The girl smuggled to England. The boy lost in the last confusion of war. But the Countess never stopped searching, and when she found him, here, painting the walls of the house where his sister lived, she chose silence. Lucien stared at him, pale. She knew? She did. He let the weight of that settle before continuing. She meant the blue silk to speak. But it was not merely for memory. It was for recognition. It carried not just the symbol of her resistance, but a hidden fold, a thread looped twice, a marker only she knew. It was how she'd identified allies, couriers, family. Celia rose slowly. Then Lucien is... Yes, Poirot said. Your twin? No one moved. Poirot stepped aside. I believe, he said quietly, you will want time to speak. As he turned to leave, the clock on the mantel chimed once. Not loudly, but enough to mark the moment the silence broke. The silence did not break all at once. It frayed at the edges, like old silk, tugged gently apart. Celia did not speak. She stood, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair she had just left. Her gaze locked on Lucien with something unreadable behind it. Shock, yes, but not disbelief, not entirely. There was a tension in her expression that suggested she had always felt something just beyond reach, a closeness she could not name. And now that it had a name, it refused to settle easily. Lucien looked as if he might vanish. Not physically, but inwardly, as if some part of him had already slipped away, trying to make space for this new truth. He opened his mouth once, closed it, then turned away and walked toward the window, staring out into the rose garden with the expression of a man seeing it for the first time. No one followed, not even Poirot. Lady Hester sat down slowly, her movements brittle with control. Her eyes never left her daughter. I didn't know, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I swear to you, Celia, I didn't know she'd found him. I believe you, Celia said. That was all. Poirot, standing near the mantel, remained silent. He knew better than to press further, to stir a moment already taut with too many unspoken things. Truth, in its deepest form, needed space to breathe. He would not fill that space with deduction. Instead, he turned to Lord Charnwood. You knew of the boy, though. It was not a question. Lord Charnwood's face darkened. I suspected, years ago. When Elsa left Vienna, she spoke of the child. But the paperwork never materialized. The records were lost, and I presumed... He faltered. I presumed he had died, or never existed at all. She was not a woman easy to read. You said nothing when Lucien arrived here. I didn't connect it, he snapped. Not consciously. He was just a painter, a distraction for Celia. But when I saw her looking at him, when Elsa arrived, I started to wonder. And yet, Poirot said, you allowed it to continue. Lord Charnwood's jaw clenched. What was I to do? Stop it? Forbid it outright without proof? That would have made it worse. And even then, I didn't think it could possibly be true. You thought it safer not to ask the question, Poirot said. Charnwood looked away. Yes. Poirot allowed the silence to linger a moment longer, then moved toward the hallway. I will speak with Lucien, he said quietly. He found the young man in the garden, standing beside the old sundial, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The roses were still in bloom, lush and fragrant, and the bees had returned in soft murmurs. The wind moved gently through the hedges. It was a beautiful afternoon for the end of something. Poirot joined him, careful not to stand too close. "She knew," Lucien said without turning. "From the beginning. She knew." "Yes. She didn't say it, but I saw it in her eyes. The night she asked me about the ribbon, the one I'd hidden in the satchel. I hadn't seen it in years, hadn't even remembered where it came from. But when I showed it to her," he exhaled sharply. "She cried." Poirot's voice was quiet. "She had waited decades to see that ribbon again. You kept it, without knowing why. That was enough." Lucien turned then, his face pale and raw. "What do I do with this now?" Poirot looked at him gently. "You mourn, you forgive, and then you decide." "She was dying," Lucien said. "Wasn't she?" Poirot nodded. "Not of poison, not even of old wounds, but of the quiet erosion that follows a life spent hiding the truth. Her heart could not carry more. She knew her time was short, so she came to place her children back where they belonged, together. She should have told us. She told you in the way she knew best, with thread, with silence, with presence." Lucien wiped his sleeve across his eyes and gave a bitter laugh. "So that's it, then. I've painted my own sister. I've nearly kissed her. I've spent a month wondering if I loved her or if I was losing my mind." "You were neither," Poirot said. "You were searching. Now you are found." Lucien looked down. "I don't know who I am anymore. You are who you have always been. But now you carry a name someone else longed for you to remember." They stood quietly for a time. Then Lucien asked, without quite meaning to, "What happens next?" "That," Poirot said gently, "is for you and Mademoiselle Celia to decide. Together or apart. There is no shame in either." He left him there, among the roses, and returned to the house. The drawing-room was empty now. Celia was upstairs. Hargrave was tending to something in the pantry. Lady Hester sat in the library, her eyes on the window, but her thoughts elsewhere. Poirot paused only briefly, then retrieved his hat from the side table. At the door, Hargrave met him. "She would have liked you," she said softly. "Madame?" "Elsa. She admired clever men, quiet ones. She would have known you were more than you seemed." Poirot offered her a gentle smile. "And you, Madame Hargrave, you are more than you seem too." She gave a weary nod. "The house is quiet now." "Yes," he said, "but it is no longer silent." Outside, Hastings was already waiting in the motor car, thumbing through a folded newspaper without reading it. "Well?" he asked, as Poirot settled in beside him. "There is no justice to be served," Poirot said. "No charges to file. Only truth, delivered late." "Will they be all right, do you think?" "They are strong. But more than that, they are no longer strangers to themselves. That is a beginning." The engine rumbled softly beneath them as the car turned back toward the road. Charnwood Grange grew smaller in the distance, its windows catching the last of the late summer sun. Poirot looked back once, not at the house, but at the thread of gravel stretching behind them, scattered with a few fallen rose petals. Not many, just enough. In the end, it had not been a case of murder. Not truly. It had been a case of memory, of identity, of a woman whose final act had been to reunite what war had scattered. And for Hercule Poirot, that was enough. The village faded behind them, the hills folding into the quiet rhythm of late afternoon. Trees passed in solemn procession, their shadows stretching across the road like reminders that even summer light grows long with memory. Hastings kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel, but his thoughts were as loud as if he'd spoken them aloud. Poirot, however, remained still, eyes half-lidded as if asleep, But Hastings knew better. "You're thinking about the girl," he said at last. Not quite a question. Poirot opened one eye. "Mademoiselle Celia?" "Oui. And the boy, Lucien. They are no longer children, but they have been given something that unravels the seams of their identities. It will take them time to decide who they wish to be. They are no longer bound by the story others told them. They must choose their own. Do you think they'll stay in touch? Be family somehow?" Poirot's fingers tapped gently against the side of his coat. "That depends on what each wishes to preserve. Connection is not obligation. It is choice. And choice, Hastings, is the most fragile of all freedoms." Hastings frowned slightly. "Still, rather a shock to learn you've a twin. Let alone that you were nearly, well," Poirot raised a brow. "Well, you know, engaged," Hastings finished, faltering. They were drawn to one another without understanding why. The heart knows what the mind forgets. In another life, they might have been lovers. In this one, they are kin. The discomfort will pass. What remains is blood. And blood, he said softly, does not require explanation, only honesty. The countryside curved around them. Soon the signs of London would begin to appear. Already the trees were thinner, the roads broader, the rhythm of rural quiet giving way to something more urgent. But Poirot still seemed far away. He leaned slightly forward and removed from his coat a small folded envelope. From within, he slid the photograph, a studio portrait, creased at the corners, the colours softened with age. It was of the Countess, not in the days of her return, but decades earlier. A younger face, though not without sadness. Her eyes were wide and dark. In her lap sat two infants, one wrapped in blue, the other in pale green. The blue silk ribbon tied around the girl's wrist was identical to the one Poirot had seen folded in Celia's top drawer. This copy of the photograph had arrived in the Morning Post, enclosed in a final delivery from Vienna. The Countess had left instructions with a solicitor. The package had reached the inn while Poirot had walked the gardens. There had been no note, no last words, just the image, carefully protected in a vellum sleeve. Poirot studied it again, then folded it neatly and returned it to his pocket. "There is one more visit I must make," he said. They did not return to London. Instead, Hastings adjusted the wheel and turned east, toward the coast. The village of Darningfield was small and pleasant, its roads lined with pale wisteria and children's bicycles leaning against low stone walls. At the end of the high street stood a modest cottage, whitewashed, ivy-covered, with a brass plate beside the door reading, "Mrs. Elspeth Marchand." Hargrave's real name. She had retired here, years earlier, before being summoned back to Charnwood to assist with delicate matters. But it was clear now that she had returned not merely as a housekeeper, but as a sentinel, a guardian of secrets that refused to stay buried. Poirot approached the door alone. She answered almost immediately, as if she'd been expecting him. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. He inclined his head. "May I?" She stepped aside. The sitting room was clean, unremarkable. A pair of knitting needles rested beside a chair. A radio murmured faintly from the kitchen. A scent of tea lingered in the air. "I won't offer you anything," she said. "You're not here for that." Poirot sat. "You have always protected the girl." "I protected what was left of the Countess," she corrected. "Celia was never mine, but she carried Elsa's breath, her tilt of chin, her temper. I wasn't going to let the world steal her again." "And yet," Poirot said gently, "you feared Lucien." "I feared what he represented, a return to chaos, to a past she'd never fully escaped." "She had escaped," Poirot said, "but escape is not peace. Peace only comes when truth is spoken." Hargrave stared at her hands. "I wanted her to be ordinary, safe, but that wasn't hers to be." "No," Poirot said. It was not. He reached into his coat and offered her the photograph. She took it slowly. Her fingers trembled slightly. "I had forgotten," she said after a moment. "That ribbon." She tied it herself, said it would keep them bound, no matter how far. Poirot rose, giving her the moment. She did not ask him to stay. As he reached the door, she called after him. "She didn't mean to die that night, did she?" Poirot turned back. But I believe she chose to let go. She had given what she could. The message had been sent. Hargrave nodded once. "Then I'll let go too." Back on the road, Hastings said nothing as they resumed their drive. Poirot did not volunteer the details. Some threads, once knotted, did not need to be retied. By the time they reached London, the sun had begun to lower again, casting long golden streaks across the pavements. A letter waited for Poirot at Whitehaven Mansions. He opened it carefully. Inside, in crisp handwriting, was a brief message. "We're going to Vienna. Together. She wants to see the street. I want to see her ribbon in the light. Thank you. Lucien." Poirot folded it slowly. He looked out the window for a long moment. Hastings came in then, fresh from changing. "Dinner?" he asked. Poirot nodded. "Yes, mon ami. Tonight, perhaps something simple." Hastings paused. "No mystery?" Poirot smiled faintly. "There is always mystery, Hastings. But some mysteries, once solved, do not haunt. They rest." He stepped away from the window. The day was ending, and the silk, at last, had been folded with peace. The restaurant Poirot selected that evening was quiet and tucked away, one of those discreet establishments in St. James's that managed to exist without ever being fashionable. Its carpet muffled every footfall. The chandeliers glowed faintly like memories too old to burn brightly, and the maitre d', a man with a moustache nearly as proud as Poirot's, greeted them as if they had dined there every night for 20 years. Hastings, starched and polished, sat across from Poirot with the patience of a man who had finally accepted that no meal with his friend would begin without at least one philosophical preamble. They ordered a mild sole for Poirot, roast for Hastings, a small carafe of wine, though Poirot barely touched his glass. For a time, they spoke of the theatre, of politics, of absurdities in the newspaper. But as the plates were cleared and dessert offered, Hastings leaned forward slightly. "I can't help thinking," he said, "that this one has stayed with you more than—" Most Poirot's spoon paused above his creme caramel. "You are perceptive, mon ami," he said. "Yes, it has lingered. Because it was about family? Because it was about fragments, half-truths. A woman who lived among ruins, not because she loved them, but because she had no map out. Elsa von Brunn did not lie out of malice. She lied out of protection, out of necessity. But she never had the chance to lay down her burdens fully. She tried to pass them carefully, to wrap them in silk. But still, they frayed." Hastings folded his arms. "But she succeeded in the end. She found them both." Poirot gave a small nod. "Yes. But what does it mean to find a child you've lost? You do not meet them as a child. You meet them as a stranger who has lived without you." He dabbed at his mouth with his napkin. "It is not a reunion. It is a collision." The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was reflective. Hastings, ever the practical one, broke it with the clink of his glass. "Do you think they'll go back to Vienna?" "They already have," Poirot said. "I received the letter." "The ribbon," Hastings murmured. "You think they'll find the place it came from?" "Perhaps," Poirot said. "But perhaps that is not the point. The ribbon is not the past. It is the question that carried them forward. It brought them together, even if it never unknots." They finished dinner quietly. Poirot refused coffee. Instead, he asked Hastings to walk. London at night had changed, but not entirely. The city still whispered in corners. It still kept its secrets between stone and lamp. They walked the mall beneath gaslights, just recently converted to electricity, though their flicker still held a ghost of another age. When they reached the park gates, Poirot stopped. "I will walk a little further alone, Hastings. You may return if you wish." "You're certain?" "Quite." Hastings nodded, not pressing. He left Poirot at the railings, where the iron turned cool in the hand, and where the trees beyond stood in still silhouette. Poirot stood there for several minutes, hands behind his back, face lifted toward the faint glimmer of stars. He was not waiting for anyone. He was listening. Memory, when it came to him, never arrived as a flood. It arrived as structure, a rearrangement. One piece dislodged, and suddenly the whole story fell into place. The ribbon, the dress, the child left in Austria, the other forgotten in England. It was not the sadness of the case that haunted him. It was its geometry. Two lives that had nearly intersected again and again. Lucien, working in a cafe in Marseille, where the Countess had once left a message sewn into the hem of a tea towel. Celia, studying languages at a school where a retired Austrian woman kept a blue silk handkerchief in her drawer, never explaining to anyone why. The Countess had walked the perimeter of her children's lives for years. She had watched, waited, hoped. But she had never stepped across the line until the very end, and Poirot understood why. Because to cross that line would have meant claiming something she feared might shatter. She could not risk being rejected. Not by them, not again. So she let the silk speak in her place. Poirot turned from the railing and began walking again. His steps were slow, deliberate. He thought then of something else, something he had not said to Hastings, something he had only begun to realize as the case reached its end. It was not merely that the Countess had died in silence, it was that she had died leaving no one responsible. There had been guilt, yes, mistakes, but no true culprit. No one had killed her, not deliberately, not with hands or weapon. And yet, there had been a murder of memory, of history, of truth. It had happened slowly, over years, with erasures, with names unsaid, with records lost and guardians silent. With each well-meaning omission, a part of Elsa's past had been trimmed away until all that remained was a whisper of blue silk. And she had worn it one last time, not to accuse, but to remind. That her life had been real, that her children had existed, that something of her had been buried beneath safety and silence, and she had the right to pull it back into the light. Poirot reached the end of the path. The gates opened to the quiet side of Westminster. He took one final breath of the night air and turned toward the river. The wind stirred. He imagined the Countess standing at Charnwood's long hallway window, watching her daughter brush her hair. He imagined her turning to Lucienne in the studio and recognizing, in the set of his shoulders, the echo of a lullaby hummed in Vienna. He imagined her placing the ribbon in her palm and folding it closed, not to keep it hidden, but because it had never needed to be loud to be true. And now, neither did he. When he returned home, he would light one candle. He would unfold the ribbon Elsa had enclosed with her portrait. One final thread, untouched by moth or stain. And he would place it not in a drawer but on the mantel, beside the letters from cases long past. A remembrance, not of sorrow, but of what it means to be found. In silence, in silk, in the eyes of someone who remembers you before you remember yourself. The letter arrived 3 weeks later. It bore no return address, no seal. Only Poirot's name, written in the tidy, confident hand of a woman accustomed to discretion. The paper was expensive but unpretentious, thick, linen woven. The ink was blue. He opened it without ceremony, though his fingers lingered briefly on the fold. Inside was a single page. Monsieur Poirot, Vienna was quiet. The street where she lived no longer exists. It was destroyed in 44. But the courtyard is still there. We stood where the window once was. Celia found a piece of broken tile buried in the earth. She kept it. I let her. We are not trying to be family. We are only trying to be honest. We leave for the Tyrol next. She says she wants to paint something that's never been stitched. I will sketch it beside her. Thank you. L.D. Poirot read it twice. Then carefully, he returned the page to its envelope and placed it inside the small drawer of his desk. His flat was quiet. The morning light filtered through the half-drawn curtains, pooling gently across the polished parquet. On the mantel, beside a small porcelain clock and a cluster of dried lilies, sat the framed photograph of the Countess with her 2 children, the ribbon across the girl's wrist now faded to the grey of remembered blue. He rose, adjusted his cuffs, and walked slowly to the case where he kept the relics of past cases, odd little souvenirs that bore no weight to others but contained entire histories for him. Among them, a red button from the Wexford matter, a matchbook from the Devonshire train affair, a single chess piece carved from ivory. And now, beneath a layer of fine tissue, the folded bolt of silk, its hue still impossibly vivid, the same impossible shade she had worn the morning of her death. He ran his fingers across its surface. There had been no crime to prosecute, and yet something had been solved. The Countess had not returned to accuse. She had not sought justice. What she had desired was recognition, not as a spy, not as a courtesan, not even as a mother, but as a whole person, one who had made choices, endured erasure, and finally stitched her truth into the world in the only way she could, quietly, precisely, and in her own language. The language of fabric, of lineage, of loyalty. In the end, Poirot had not caught a killer. He had simply followed a thread through rooms filled with silence and found 2 people who had forgotten the shape of their names and returned it to them. He looked once more at the blue silk, then closed the case. There would be other mysteries. There always were. But some stories did not need to end with handcuffs. Some ended simply with remembrance, with 2 siblings standing beside a vanished courtyard, holding silence like inheritance, and with one man, moustaches impeccably trimmed, allowing himself, for just one moment, to believe that perhaps, in the great catalogue of human frailty, truth could arrive not with a bang, but with a whisper, folded, not shouted, sown, not spoken, as precise and as enduring as a question of blue silk.